Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session 3 of the Spirituality and Mental Health webinar series, Spirituality and Severe Mental Illness, Questions of Recovery versus Purposeful Renewal. I'll now turn the presentation over to Shannon Royce.
Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate your work on this and your calm, quiet introduction, and welcome to our friends. My name is Shannon Royce. I'm the Director of the Center for Faith and Opportunity Initiatives. It is a joy to welcome you to this third in our series on spirituality and mental health that we are co-hosting with our friend and colleague, Dr. Lisa Miller, who is with the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute of Teachers College at Columbia University. Lisa will do some opening remarks momentarily, but first, a few housekeeping things we need to remind you of. This is an educational webinar, off the record and not intended for press purposes. So if you are a member of the press, we ask that you allow us to connect you with the Office of Public Affairs at the end of the webinar. If you're having difficulty hearing us clearly, many people find it helpful to use the call-in number that Zoom provides. So if your computer is not giving you clarity to hear, then we would encourage you to use the phone number that Zoom provides. We will be sending a link to the PowerPoints of our speakers today. And so would encourage you to be watching for that in the next couple of days in the follow-up email that we send, and that will allow you to have all of the materials being shared with you today. And finally, this is a really full and exciting program today. And so we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom center of your screen to ask your questions as we go through the program, and we will get to as many of those questions as we're able to at the end of the program, at the end of our presentations. Now I want to turn it over to my dear friend Lisa Miller, Dr. Lisa Miller from Columbia University, to hear her opening thoughts and comments on this exciting webinar. Lisa?
Thank you so much, Shannon, and it continues to be a great privilege and a joy to collaborate with you, Shannon, and your very innovative partnership center. It's really been a natural collaboration. We come from the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute at Columbia University Teachers College, and the Institute effectively creates and uses science as a blueprint to help support a more spiritually aware society, focusing primarily on mental health and human flourishing. Of the 6 topics, we hope that you'll join us throughout our series. Today, we're focusing on severe mental illness, and the science here is particularly strong. It turns out that while spirituality and faith are extremely helpful in recovery and prevention for all people across a broad range of mental diagnoses, there is a particularly robust protective benefit found in people with severe mental illness. It is, if I might ask you for the next slide, it is actually through times of suffering and darkness that spirituality can serve not only to be a source of light and clarity, but even to deepen our awareness. When it comes to severe mental illness, if I might trouble you for the next slide, by way of example, I'm going to share this study here that we published probably about 8 years ago in the American Journal of Psychiatry, together with my colleagues at Columbia Medical School. We looked here at people who were either at high risk or low risk for depression based on their family history. People whose mothers were severely depressed with recurrent depression or not, such that they were double loaded, both with the genes and also perhaps, if you will, growing up under the rain cloud of depression. And what we found was, again, for all people in this sample, both those at low and high risk, when we looked at everyone put together, next slide, please, I'll invite you to look at the top line of this table here. I am, the way we read this, top left corner, 24% as likely, which is to say 76% less likely to have major depressive disorder if I have a strong personal religion or spirituality. Okay, so looking at people at high and low risk, everyone all together, I'm 75% less likely to have an episode prospectively over 10 years, 24% as likely, 76% less likely, if I have a strong, highly important religion or spirituality. But then when we took that very same group of adults and we split them in half, those who grew up in depressed environments were loaded for depression, and those who did not. We found a very interesting and quite remarkably different picture, if I might invite the next slide. Here, when we take the same table and effectively split it in half, high risk on the top, low risk on the bottom, we see the extraordinarily robust protective benefit. I am only 9% as likely, which is to say I am 91% at decreased relative risk, 91% at decreased relative risk for a major depressive episode if I have a strong personal spirituality or religion and I am at high risk. Spirituality is extraordinarily protective against recurrence in people who've had past episodes, who have very a low trip cord, if you will, for recurrence. And yet in the low risk group, you see it is no longer even significant. High religion or spirituality in this group was no longer a significant protective benefit. So long and the short of it, while spirituality and religion are helpful to all people in prevention of onset of mental illness, and here we're looking at depression, when it comes to people at high risk who've had multiple episodes, prevention of recurrence, and alongside that in other studies, the onset of comorbidities, the addiction that comes with depression, the secondary diagnoses, is particularly of benefit to those of us with severe mental illness, those at high risk. So final slide, I want to thank so much the people for coming today and share with you just a bit, if we were to look inside, if you will, the brains of these people, what is going on for those at high risk versus low risk. And what we see here, this is an article I shared last week, published in JAMA Psychiatry 2014, same team for the most part as in the prior article. We're looking here at the brains of those people who you just saw in the tables. And it turns out that if over time I maintain my personal spirituality, there are broad and pervasive regions of cortical thickness, processing power, if you will, represented here in red. By way of analogy, a muscle may be stronger. Well, just as we saw that in the high-risk group, there was an added benefit of personal faith, here we see at the very level of the docking station of our awareness, the neural correlates of our perception, the broad and pervasive regions in red were far more abundant in the high-risk group as compared to the low-risk group. So even though, as a person at high risk for depression, I might, all other things being equal, be inclined to think I'm headed into yet another episode, if I practice a spiritual response to suffering, I build a framework for being and seeing that prevents recurrence. It's not that I never get depressed again, but I am neuroprotected against recurrence. And that is, by way of analogy, larger than any other variable we have yet to identify in clinical or social science. Last slide. So Shannon, I'm going to invite you to take it away. Always grateful for this. Today I'm coming to you from the top floor of the Pentagon, so Shannon will be leading the way here out. But just as we use this science in our work here, the Pentagon is using this science to protect the extraordinary men and women who serve. So I'm so grateful to have had the chance to join you today. And Shannon, I know your extraordinary leadership will take this forward.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We're so excited about what you're doing with the Pentagon. It is really wonderful work, and your service there is just so appreciated. Thank you for that. We'll miss you today, but we'll see you soon. We're going to turn now to our first speaker. And Nancy, if I may, Dr. Kehoe, if I could ask you to turn off your camera, and we'll have Matt do our first speaking. Thank you very much. We'll have Matt do our first address today. Dr. Matt Stanford, he's the CEO of Hope and Healing Center and Institute in Houston, Texas, an adjunct professor of psychiatry at Baylor College of Medicine and Houston Methodist Hospital Institute for Academic Medicine. Dr. Stanford's research on the interplay between psychology and issues of faith has been featured in multiple publications. Dr. Stanford earned his doctoral degree in behavioral neuroscience at Baylor University and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston. Professionally, he has worked with a variety of mentally ill clients, including those with aggression, personality disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance dependence, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. As director of HHCI, he writes, conducts training seminars, and serves individuals living with mental illness and their families. Matt, we're so grateful for your being with us today. Thank you. We'll turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Shannon, and Ben. Thanks for having me today. And so I thought I would share a little bit about the things that we've been doing here at the Hope and Healing Center in relationship to faith and spirituality with individuals who are struggling with severe mental illness. I got into this a few years ago, or actually many years ago, because I became very interested in how individuals interact with faith communities, particularly people with serious mental illness. I saw that there was a significant void in the treatment or interaction of individuals with serious mental illness through faith communities. I also was really struck by the statistic that individuals in psychological distress are more likely to go to a clergy before they go to a psychiatrist or a primary care physician. And so we began to look at what is happening when individuals go to faith communities, and really not a lot was happening. Individuals weren't really being recognized, and they certainly weren't being referred. And so an opportunity was being missed to get those individuals to care. And as we all know, a majority of individuals with mental health problems in the U.S. don't receive treatment. And so we thought we had a real opportunity to step into that space and help people to get care and help faith communities do a better job of serving and caring for people that are struggling with these problems. I did notice that within faith communities, there already was a great deal of work being done around counseling issues. For instance, individuals who had marriage and family issues or financial problems. And so we really don't work with individuals that are struggling with those types of issues. We work with people that have serious mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, things such as that. So as I'm talking about these things, do realize that those are the types of individuals that we're working with. So what we do at the Hope and Healing Center, it sits on the campus of St. Martin's Episcopal Church in Houston, Texas. We're a separate entity, but they do provide us a building. Is at the Hope and Healing Center, we have a fully comprehensive mental health clinic for individuals with severe mental illness. We offer a psychotherapeutic intervention, which I'll talk more about in just a moment. We have case management for the individual and family. We have psychiatric services and medication management, as well as a variety of support groups for those individuals as well. Individuals that go into our program will be in the program anywhere from 8 to 12 months, depending on which therapeutic approach that they take. And our therapeutic approaches are primarily cognitive behavior therapy or dialectical behavior therapy. And so when individuals are in our programs, the services are all free. And we even pay for the individual's medication while they're in the program. So you may be in the program for a year and all of your services are paid for. And what we use in our cognitive behavior therapy program is a curriculum that we've written that is an integrated curriculum that divides an individual's needs up into physical needs, spiritual needs, mental needs, and relational needs based on the needs and issues that individuals with mental health problems or severe mental illness might struggle with. We take a very partnership approach to therapy. And we allow the client to help choose which topics we might work on at a given time. So in the physical realm, for instance, they might be working on medication, looking at side effects, or they might be working on sleep. In the spiritual realm, we tend to focus around areas of hope, purpose building, identity. And I've really found that those really are questions of faith. And it helps us build a foundation for recovery in these individuals. So they may decide that they may tell the therapist they really don't have any hope, or they don't know if they have value or worth. And that gives us an opportunity to work with them from a spiritual perspective, helping them understand where is God in their life, or what does God say about them, what does God say about their future. And that is integrated throughout as they work. So one week they may be working on a physical issue or a spiritual issue or so forth. but the client helps to pick those things. We also have done it in that way where it's divided up like that because it allows us to work with clients of any faith tradition. It allows us to work with clients who even don't believe in God, who aren't particularly interested in that, because they really kind of help us determine what we're going to work on week to week. What we do find is that ultimately with time, virtually all of our clients are interested in working on their spiritual life. And we've really found significant increases or significant decreases in symptoms and dramatic changes in kind of clinical functionality for these individuals. It's really what drove me to develop the curriculum in that way was the fact that I've seen a lot of people with serious mental illness within the mental health world kind of really just be looked at as stabilization is the best that they can get. And I know we can do so much more. And so when an individual comes in and they may be struggling with a spiritual issue, that's an opportunity for us to help them recover in a particular area that may not necessarily be related to their mental health problem. And so we use that integrated curriculum. Now, something that we do that I think is very different and unique for the Hope and Healing Center is we also recognize that people are more likely to go to faith communities. So we have a program called Gateway to Hope where we go into faith communities around the Houston area and we train them to recognize mental health care problems, how to make referrals into a referral network that we've developed, and how to set up services for those individuals with serious mental illness in their faith communities, such as support groups or mental health coaching. So we train mental health coaches. We've partnered with the American Association of Christian Counselors to offer a 40-hour intensive mental health coach training. Those individuals learn how to do our brief CBT curriculum. They learn how to do assessments, intakes, referrals. They oversee the support groups, and they can offer a lot of comfort and counsel to the families of these individuals as well. So they can work with individual on a weekly basis. Our support groups are for individuals with serious mental illness or for caregivers. We have a separate one for caregivers, or for individuals who've suffered some type of trauma in their life. All of our materials and all of our groups, all of our curricula have been tested. I was a longtime academic and had graduate students that actually did dissertations as we were developing these things, and they've all been demonstrated to be efficacious. We get a significant reduction in symptoms with our support groups and our curricula, as well as an increase, and I think this is what's really different about our materials, an increase in spiritual growth. And when I say spiritual growth, I mean that on measures of attachment and intimacy with God, individuals score higher after they've completed the program or completed the support group. We also see a greater involvement in the spiritual disciplines, for instance, more prayer, more attendance of church. In fact, part of the program is to help the individual identify a supportive faith community if they don't already have one that will be able to help them through their recovery. And so many of the individuals for the first time are able to connect with a fellowship of believers that allows them the kind of support that they need during their recovery. So all of those are done, again, by peers or laymen in the faith communities. And at this time, we're in over 150 congregations throughout the Houston area of all different denominations and groups. We began in the 5 poorest zip codes of Houston and now have expanded out across the city and continue to expand. All of our materials and training are available free. We do them in person, but they're also now all available online at a website called mentalhealthgateway.org, mentalhealthgateway.org. Even the 40-hour intensive mental health coach training now has been brought online through our collaboration with the American Association of Christian Counselors. And again, I have to really reiterate, we're not talking about working with individuals with counseling issues. We're talking about people that are suffering from severe mental illness. And yes, indeed, we are getting a significant symptom reduction in those individuals, both through our support groups and through our psychotherapeutic intervention with the CBT curriculum, all of which have a very heavy mental health or spirituality component. In fact, for the support groups, to give you an idea what that looks like on a kind of weekly basis, it's psychoeducational, but it's integrated with faith. So the individuals begin the evening with a story of faith, either from scripture or some related to that. So it's basically faith, facts, and future each night. So you begin with a story of faith and then some discussion around that. Then you have facts, which are a discussion of the topic of that night, which might be medication or grief or whatever the topic is of that night. It's a topical set of sessions. And then finally, future are very specific practical actions that you can put in place immediately to begin to help with your recovery. And usually they run from 13 to 16 weeks. And again, as I said, they've been found to be highly effective at reducing symptoms and in increasing spiritual growth. Our trauma group, actually, I developed with Muslim populations while I was working in Libya during the revolution with traumatized civilian populations. And so we have used the materials in both Muslim and in Christian groups. And we also have worked with Jewish congregations with the training as well. So it is set up in such a way that we might be able to use it across faith traditions, kind of focusing on more God's connection to the individual and how God sees the individual to help, again, build hope, build purpose, and help the individual have a stronger identity. We find that that's been a really more effective way for us to help with those individuals as opposed to what we traditionally are taught in mental health training is, that to help the individual build hope. Oftentimes I find that clients their hope tends to be focused more on whether their symptoms can be reduced rather than a broader hope that kind of transcends or goes beyond their mental health problem, in which the discussions of faith and spirituality allow us to put it in that context as opposed to whether your symptoms will get better or not, whether you'll be able to function at this level or not. The hope transcends that. The same thing with purpose. It allows us to put purpose into a bigger context, a broader context, that just isn't just, well, this job or that job. It's a broader purpose that God might have for your life that may include specific acts, but it's a broader purpose. And the same thing with identity. You have a sense of value, a sense of worth that's based on your creator as opposed to what the world may say about you, what you may feel about you. And we've just simply found it to be just a better kind of approach, a little bit more solid approach to building those constructs within an individual. Another thing that we found to be very helpful in the context of using spirituality and faith and with those of serious mental illness is, as we all know, a very common problem with particularly those who have psychotic disorders or spiritual delusions, spiritual hallucinations. And we actually have found it to be quite helpful in getting individuals into initial treatment, particularly those that may be paranoid or are concerned about the situation out of some fear, because they have been very willing to come and talk about the spiritual aspects of what is occurring to them rather than the mental health aspects. So having our curriculum and our approach divided up where you can choose, say, whether you're going to work on medication or sleep or nutrition or whatever, as opposed, or maybe choose the spiritual aspects, allows an individual that may be struggling with some spiritual delusion to come in and say, well, I'm not willing at this time to talk about this mental health problem because perhaps I don't even think I have a mental health problem, but I would be interested in talking to you about the spiritual aspects of what's going on in my life. And we have had a number of clients that, frankly, that was the only way, and we were the first individuals to ever be able to get them into care because they were willing to come and build that relationship through a spiritual discussion. And again, having been in mental health for, at this point, almost 30 years, I tend to find that those in private practice or in more kind of public settings are really don't have that, either that training or that approach to where they would be able to discuss spiritual issues with someone for multiple sessions before they were able to actually begin more of a classic kind of a therapeutic intervention. But we've found that to be very, very helpful and very much an opportunity to build that therapeutic relationship, an opportunity to earn trust in the individual, and also an opportunity to help them see the beneficial sides of the spiritual aspects of their mental health problem. Because oftentimes it's up to us to help them differentiate between the kind of beneficial side of the spiritual experience that they're having and those that may be more related to the disorder and may be something that will go away with treatment. Many of our clients feel that God has spoken to them through their mental health problem, even though they recognize that indeed it was a mental health problem. And so I think having spirituality as a key component of what we're doing allows us to help them with that conflict or that discussion, so that they then might recognize that even as we struggle, as Dr. Miller said, as we struggle in these situations, there can be a beneficial spiritual side where we see that kind of spiritual growth and growth as an individual as we move forward from these different types of problems. And I would say overall, many people ask me what the response has been. Churches are extremely, faith communities are extremely open and interested in this. We have a waiting list for training. They really are overwhelmed with mental health problems at this point, and they simply don't know what to do. We do have a provider network of over 1,000 providers in the community that we've vetted. One of our aspects of vetting is we ask them how they feel about working with religious clients. And we just want to make sure that it's a faith-affirming environment. We're not necessarily looking for people of particular faith, although we have those within our database. But we want to make sure it's a faith-affirming environment so that individuals that are referred from faith communities or individuals that are working with a clergy or one of our mental health coaches from a faith perspective feel comfortable in that environment. And we've found, obviously from a network of over 1,000 providers, an enormous number, if not the vast majority of mental health care providers are happy to work collaboratively with faith leaders and with individuals within faith communities so that individuals can get to care and see the recovery that they so desperately need. So as a whole, I would say in summary, I would say that we've had great success with the use of spirituality. In fact, I'm not even sure where we would be without it, because not only does it help us draw in clients that are struggling with spiritual delusions, it also is tremendously beneficial for their recovery, not just those with spiritual delusions, but it gives them a greater sense of hope, purpose, and identity, as I said. But also, as we work in faith communities, since we know that that's the first place that people are more likely to go when they struggle with these problems, it allows us to more seamlessly move between the mental health and faith community by having materials and an approach that speaks the language of faith. People in faith communities feel much more comfortable with that than if you simply come in and try to describe, a psychotherapeutic approach. It also helps them understand that they are part of the process of recovery, if nothing more than from a supportive aspect, although we have them do much more than that. They're offering a therapeutic support, but they are a recovery community for the individual, not just a place where someone goes and then is sent away to get help in the hopes that when they come back, they'll be so much better. So I will end there and let Dr. Kehoe jump in.
Thank you so much, Matt. Your work is both practical and inspiring. I have always so enjoyed hearing your presentations because you bring such enlightenment to us about how we can work in this space effectively. So thank you so much for your work. We look forward to hearing now from Dr. Nancy Kehoe, and let me introduce her so you hear a little bit about who she is, and then we'll let her take this away. Dr. Nancy Kehoe, RSCJ and PhD, is a member of the Religious of the Sacred Heart. Over a period of 17 years, she has held administrative roles within her order. She is also an assistant professor of psychology in the Department of Psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School. Her area of expertise is religion and spirituality in the clinical context. For 35 years, using a model she created, Dr. Kehoe has led groups on spiritual beliefs and values for adults with psychiatric disabilities. She currently consults with healthcare providers in mental health settings. She has presented at regional, national, and international conferences and published on the subject of religion and psychotherapy. She has published a book as well as a popular YouTube video series addressing faith and mental health. She is on the cutting edge. She's got her own video series. Additional information can be found on her website at www.expandingconnections.com. And we will make sure to include that website in our follow-up materials. Dr. Kehoe, we're so happy to have you with us here today. Please take it away and share with our audience.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Well, Matt, I think I made the wrong decision in letting you go first. You're a hard act to follow. Unlike Matt, I have been kind of a lone wolf in this process over these years. So what I'm going to do is speak from a somewhat limited experience of doing this work in Cambridge. Most of the time as kind of a lone wolf. What I would like to share with you this afternoon is what I have done, what I have learned, and why it's critical to address religion and spirituality in the clinical context. I have not seen myself as a visionary, but a curious person, and I became an unintentional pioneer. In the late 70s, when I was doing a postdoctoral internship at Cambridge Hospital, which is affiliated with Harvard Medical School, I noticed that nobody in that context ever made a reference or an inquiry about a person's religion or spirituality. And since I had already spent many years in religious life, I found that a curiosity, that people were omitting a critical part of a person's life. And I didn't think of it necessarily as always a good part of a person's life, because as we know, sometimes religion and religious traditions have done harm to people. But I thought it was a point of inquiry to understand the whole person. So the first thing that I did in raising the question, and after discovering that the clinicians didn't understand or know what words to use or what it was appropriate to ask, I developed a religious history assessment. And that you can get more information about that from my website. I wanted to give people language that they felt comfortable using in exploring this area of a person's life. The second thing that we did, because I am a member of a religious order and I was involved with the clergy groups in Cambridge, we started a group for clergy and mental health professionals in 1980. And the idea in doing that was the recognition that because of the small geographic area that Cambridge was, that people were going to Cambridge Hospital in the emergency room on Saturday night, but they were going to their religious traditions or their pastors on Sunday morning, often with the same issues: suicidality, delusions, depression. And so we began this group, and the idea was to bring together clergy from the different religious denominations in Cambridge and mental health professionals, so that A, that they would get to know each other, B, that they would know resources that they could turn to, and C, that they could understand the different perspective of these two disciplines. That group met monthly, and it went on for 10 years. It's easily replicable in a given area where either there are insufficient mental health professionals, but as Matt said, people turn to the clergy, or the clergy don't know the resources that are in the mental health world. And the focus was to have each discipline present a case each month. So 1 month it was the mental health professionals, 1 month it was the clergy, and understand from the different perspectives how people would deal with those issues. The third thing that happened was in 1981, following a consultation at a psychiatric day treatment program, we began a group at first entitled Religious Issues. And there, the point was well, first of all, it was the recognition that no one was allowing the clients to talk about their religion or spirituality in clinical work. So offering the clients an opportunity to explore or think about how did their beliefs hurt them or help them as they struggled with mental illness. And as Matt said, all the men and women in the group experienced severe mental illness. Most had been hospitalized. Many of them were the result of the deinstitutionalization. Several had made suicide attempts. All were on medication. And so the groups were voluntary, they were interdenominational, and the only requirement was that people had to respect and tolerate the differences in the group. Over time, it became clear that the title, Religious Issues, seemed limiting to some of the clients. They thought we were just going to talk about going to church or going to synagogue. And so we changed it to Spiritual Beliefs and Values. And as Shannon said, that those groups lasted in 3 different day treatment programs for 35 years, and they only ended because the day treatment programs closed due to funding. For 6 years, we did groups on inpatient units at the state psychiatric hospital. And so those were with the men and women who were not well enough to be deinstitutionalized. And yet even there, we found that allowing people a place to talk about what they believed was beneficial, and it gave them hope. Over time, I've had the opportunity and the blessing, I would say, to train other professionals through workshops and through ongoing extended programs. And as Shannon mentioned, in 2009, I published Wrestling with Our Inner Angels, Faith, Mental Illness, and the Journey to Wholeness. And my point in writing that book was to really present a different image of a person with mental illness, so that the reader could see a person who had many gifts, many artistic abilities, and happened to live with a mental illness. So it wasn't a mentally ill person, but a person with a mental illness. In 2009, we began a group at a Catholic parish here in Cambridge, and the group was entitled Caring for the Soul. The point of the group, again, was to give people, but there it was a much more explicitly faith-oriented group. In the psychiatric day treatment programs, it was more psychodynamic, with the intention of helping people give voice to what they believed and try to figure out how they wanted to use it or let go of it. Whereas in the parish group, it was much more focused on how does a person's faith help them as they struggle with mental illness or live with mental illness. And that group was open to parents of adult children with mental illness, adults with mental illness, and anybody in the parish who wanted to join the group. It's been advertised in the NAMI monthly publication, so we frequently get members from NAMI who don't have any other place where they can talk about the role of faith in their lives. The group meets monthly for 90 minutes, and it has met every single month for the last 10 years with one exception, and that was the year we had 10 feet of snow in Boston. So we missed 1 month. What have I learned in the process of this work? The primary learning for me has been that people are more than their illness. They are more than their diagnosis. And that contrary to long-held assumptions that people with serious mental illness can talk coherently, articulately, compassionately, and thoughtfully about their beliefs and their illness. That it's not a defense, now it doesn't mean that sometimes people suffer from delusions, but in the process of allowing people a space to talk about it, oftentimes people begin to recognize, or other people in the group can help them recognize, that that's part of their illness, that's not a part of their healthier side. The other thing that I've learned, and I think this is particularly important for those of you who are listening on this webinar who are clergy, is that in working with men and women who struggle with mental illness, who live with mental illness, it can be a challenge to what we believe. And these men and women that I've had the gift of working with over these 35 years have transformed my spiritual life and my religious beliefs. It isn't that I've let go of them, but I've had to re-look at them. That in the face of enormous suffering, it doesn't work to say, this is God's will. At least it doesn't work for them, and it hasn't worked for me. So that's one small example of how these men and women have invited me to look at what I believe, how I can rethink what I believe, and reclaim it from a different perspective. Because they've also been from different religious traditions, that's been an invitation to see how broadly different religious traditions work on this or conceive of those ideas. So I think in working with people with serious mental illness as clergy, we have to be open to their challenges, and they're very real challenges. As clinicians, I think the challenge is oftentimes clinicians, because they have unresolved religious issues themselves, or they may have belonged to a religious tradition and then they let go of it when they got into their mental health professions. They want to avoid discussion of religion and spirituality because they haven't resolved it for themselves, or they still have some anger, they still have some resentment about what they were taught or messages that they learned or ways that families impose religion. So for a clinician to work with religion and spirituality in a person's life, he or she will be invited to think about the role of religion and spirituality in their lives, and hopefully bring it back into the picture. As I think for myself, I mentioned my own transformation, and I am still a Roman Catholic nun, and the order that I belonged to for years was cloistered, which meant that we lived in a very constricted, limited world. And what I became aware of as I did these groups on spirituality with the clients was that I had a cloistered mentality. I had a way of thinking about God and religion and beliefs. And over time, the clients, through their interventions, through their questions, through bringing in poetry and music and art to the groups, expanded my consciousness to go from religion to spirituality, and which is a much broader concept. And we can be religious and spiritual, we can be religious and not spiritual, and we can be spiritual and not religious. So the clients really opened me to the possibility that spirituality, or ruah, or breath, is where energy is, it's where life is, it's where a person's hope is. It's not about dogmas and doctrines and obligations and rules. Those can contain people, they help people, and they give people a structure. I think clinically, the way my working with the men and women in the groups changed me was that, and I think this is something that we have to be honest with ourselves, that as clinicians, we can have a somewhat, we wouldn't probably acknowledge it all the time, but a sense of it. I am the healthy one helping you who are the person with the illness. And in my work with these men and women and dealing with their suffering, observing their resilience, their courage, their compassion, their generosity, they brought me to a level playing field, so that we were all in this together. We were all trying to figure out, how does one cope with suffering? How does one live with it? How does one not have it destroy the whole person, but become something that's a source of richness? And the best compliment I ever received was when one of the clients said to me, "We should call you an honorary mental patient." And my last point is, why is this crucial? The point is that we are working with a whole person. We are not working with a diagnosis. We are not working with just a faith system. We are working with the whole person. And as Lisa Miller talks about in her book so powerfully, that we're all spiritual. And I'd like to end with this idea that I see serious mental illness as the great robber. Those of us who are on this webinar today who know the story of the Good Samaritan, I think of a person with severe mental illness in that story. that oftentimes people with severe mental illness are the ones who are abandoned by the road. And it's the great robber because it robs a person of self-esteem, of meaning and purpose in life, of hope. It can affect their work and relationship, and it leads to a sense of isolation and disconnection. And as Matt so beautifully illustrated, the reason why religious traditions and communities are so life-giving for people with severe mental illness is because they affirm the value of the individual. So that counterbalances the negative self-esteem. They offer meaning, that we're a part of a larger whole, that we each have a purpose. They offer hope in the stories that they tell of people who have overcome great odds, in the traditions that they educate people to, and in the rituals that serve us so well. And they offer people relationships in a community that breaks down their isolation and disconnection. So rather than thinking about just recovery or renewal, I would like to think about reevaluation, that what is at the heart of this is the value of the whole person, that we work with a whole person. So if we're working with them clinically, we take into account their faith or religious traditions, or we help them to articulate what has been problematic about them, how they want to work with them. And if we're working from a faith community perspective, that we acknowledge that a person with mental illness is a person with mental illness, and they can be a great addition to the community. So I thank you and look forward to your questions.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Kehoe. That was inspirational. I really particularly love two things about your comments. Your Good Samaritan analogy is the same analogy that I use regularly in talking with people about mental illness and how we can come alongside. And we are enriched as well as they are in that journey. But I also particularly like your comment about the insight that people with mental illness can bring to our lives, the spiritual insight they can bring to our lives, and how they make us grow also and be more in tune and more sensitive to how we address suffering in our own lives and the lives of those we love. So thank you so much for those comments. We have so many questions. So Matt, if you'll come back on screen, and we will get to as many of these questions as we can. I'm just gonna dive in here and we'll get to as many as we can. And I wanna start with a couple of questions that Dr. Miller had shared. She was not able to stay with us because of this other commitment, but she did share a few questions. We're focusing today on the difference between recovery from a clinical diagnosis, which may not be possible on the one hand, and renewal found through deepening and redirection on the other hand. And then you threw in, Nancy, the reevaluation. So you can figure that into this question as well. We'd like to invite you to share with us just a story of one of the clients you've worked with and how this spiritual renewal was a part of their coming to a greater sense of peace in their own lives and greater sense of stability. Would love for each of you to take a moment to share a story with us.
Okay,
Nancy.
I'll start with that one. I'm going to talk about a man named Rick, and his parents came to the Caring for the Soul group, which is the group that I've been doing in the parish in Cambridge. And they persuaded him that he should come to the group. So he started to come to the group probably about 7 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. He came very reluctantly, really at the urging of his parents. He was in his early 40s. He had a dual diagnosis. He had chronic depression, and he had been in AA. He was in recovery in AA, but that had been a part of his life. He, as I said, he came very reluctantly as a skeptic because he had left the Catholic Church and religion years ago when he was doing his work in theater. For many, many months, he attended the group regularly, but mostly shared his anger about the church, the clergy abuse, the messages that he had heard growing up, the oppression of the church in terms of issues around homosexuality. And he was just a very resistant, angry man. Over time, as people listened to him and allowed him to talk about whatever he was going on at the time, very, very gradually, he began to put his toe back in the water. So the first thing, I mean, first of all, was his regular attendance at the group. And then intermittently, he began to go back to church, and then he began to pray. And suddenly, he began to articulate some shift that he was noticing in himself, some sense of peace and some openness. And over time, what that openness started to move toward was a deepening desire to use his life for others and to use his experience of alcoholism and mental illness in the service of other people. And this led to his pursuing the idea of joining a religious order, which he has done. And he has just recently been accepted for vows in that religious order. So he went from, the dual diagnosis. He wasn't ever an atheist because he believed in God. He was just angry at God, into a life where he hopes to put all that to practice in the service of others.
That's beautiful. Yeah, go ahead, man.
Well, I'm trying to. I don't have one quite as beautiful as that one.
Well, that's I'm
trying to think of which one's the best. I'll go with this one. It's a little bit of a. It's not quite as eloquent. Of course, I'm not quite as eloquent of a speaker as you are. There was a gentleman that saw a few years ago who was a longtime missionary. He and his wife to Africa. And it was an older gentleman. I mean, he's probably in his late 50s, early 60s. But the mission organization had changed the necessary threshold for fundraising per year right around the same time that he was seeing a decline in his fundraising. And so it threw him into some significant anxiety. That anxiety, then he was required to go to a conference about fundraising, and at that conference he had a panic attack, and then that drove him into a pretty deep depression, which ultimately turned into a depressive psychosis. So he was hospitalized and spent several weeks in the hospital, and when he came out, he was in a pretty deep depression with some psychotic symptoms that were being minimally managed. And they came to me because they were interested in a spiritual only approach. They want to have nothing to do with psychiatry and psychology. That's the world. And they believed that what was wrong with him was a spiritual oppression, a demonic oppression. And they wanted just a spiritual only. And because of the approach that we take, what it allowed us to do was to begin to speak with him about spiritual matters, which was his language, which is what he was comfortable with, which is what he wanted to hear. And as we began to have those discussions, we then were able to broaden that out into the idea of God's providence for him, and that God may provide remedies such as medications or insights from individuals that have special understanding of the body and things like that. So we were able to move him into a psychotherapeutic approach with a clinical psychologist that worked in collaboration with the pastoral counselor. We were then able to move him to begin to take some medication. And over a period of really a relatively brief period of time, he was able not only to really see some significant symptom reduction, but in the more of the kinds of lines we're talking about right now, he no longer felt like he was being spiritually oppressed, and recognized that this was not God punishing him for being a bad missionary or not raising enough money, but it was simply a trial in his life that God was walking him through, and actually reported at the end of this that he had a stronger relationship with God, a stronger faith, and felt felt more hopeful for the future than he did long before this even began. And all of that began because we were willing to engage him really where he was, talking about spiritual matters, as opposed to, unfortunately, what a lot of times happens, which is, well, I'm a psychiatrist or I'm a therapist and I'm here to work on this. If you want to do that, there's people for you to talk to. And ultimately, he fully recovered and was able to be reinstated in the mission organization and went back into the mission field and is doing very, very well. But again, without that connection, that spiritual connection, you had an individual who felt really was adopting a very negative religious coping strategy. And I don't really believe that even if he had engaged secular therapy without the religious aspects, I'm not sure he would have seen the recovery that he did. He certainly would have seen the renewal.
So he's a beautiful example of how his spiritual life actually was deepened through the experience that he went through. And he was enriched by that, and he's going on with his life. That's really lovely. Thank you for sharing that. Let me ask another question that came in from our audience, because I think this is a question of interest to many, particularly in this season when COVID has been so affecting to minority communities. Do either of you have experience working with people from minority backgrounds? And are there any ways that work in those communities, including the African American community, is unique? And either of you can speak to that.
I'll jump in on that one first. Actually, with our Gateway to Hope program here in Houston, we actually started the program in the 5 poorest zip codes of Houston, which are predominantly African American. One is partially Hispanic. And so we have a very heavy footprint in the African American community and are really in a new initiative. We have all of our materials in Spanish now and are making a heavy push this year in the Hispanic community. But we actually find that ethnic minorities are actually, in fact, what the data shows us as well, is that they are more interested in discussions of spirituality and faith in the context of these issues than Caucasians. In fact, they are even more likely than Caucasians to go to clergy before mental health care providers and are less likely to ever engage a mental health care provider. And so we've actually found that the African American churches are very much more a community center than you would find in a suburban or type of church, where individuals go for all types of issues, and mental health being a significant part of that. So we have found tremendous benefit and results in the African American community, and now seeing that in the Spanish-speaking community as well.
Nice, Dr. Kehoe.
No, I would absolutely just support what Matt said. I'm currently working on a chapter for a book on the collaboration between psychiatry and clergy. And that's exactly what the research shows, is that people from the African American and Latino communities will go to clergy first. I haven't had the experience that Matt has, but I certainly know from reading that that's very true. We've had some African Americans in the group, and by and large, they were always more explicit about their religious beliefs. But I think Matt's got a much richer background on this than I do.
Thank you so much for that from both of you. Another question that came in that I think is particularly intriguing, and I'm curious of your answer. Both of you have mentioned that spirituality has made a difference for those who have no particular faith perspective historically in their life. And we would love to hear what that looks like. How does that play out? And how does that affect their ongoing recovery and renewal?
It's hard to find people that are really atheist. That's even that are really atheist. That's what the research even shows. A real atheist. They believe there's no way, And so you're really working with, people of faith or people that are agnostic in some way. And I think AA, for instance, has long, this idea of a higher power, and that can be literally anything. I remember a woman that was at an AA with someone that I was affiliated with, that her higher power, she used a Power Ranger doll that she carried around, this little tiny, and she said that was her higher power. But there's an example of a woman here that it was a horribly traumatized woman. It's in our trauma group for women that have been the victims of sexual assault. And she describes herself as an atheist, although I don't know that she really is fully atheistic. But all the other women in the group are women of faith, and it's a faith-based group, much like I've described in my other talk. She thinks it's kind of funny that they put so much emphasis on God in their life as part of their recovery. But she also will tell you at the same time, she will never miss that group because it saved her life. She is bound to those women in the discussions that they have, and finds comfort in the discussions that they have about religion and spirituality, even though she doesn't necessarily internalize it the way they do. But she does internalize it. She internalizes the idea of hope and identity and worth and value and purpose, although she doesn't necessarily connect that directly to a transcendence that she believes in. She finds value in the fact that they believe in that individual. And so it's been very interesting to listen to her descriptions of it. And we find that same thing. We have plenty of people from all types of faiths that come here, and they aren't so concerned about the specifics that are discussed as they are in the hopefulness of the discussion itself.
So the sense of hope and also the connection and community that they get
Absolutely.
in participating in those groups, that also provides hope to them.
Absolutely.
Dr. Kehoe?
I would say that one of the most interesting things that I've learned in developing this religious history assessment tool was asking people if they ever belong to a religious tradition, if they currently belong to a religious tradition, and if they say no, to ask them if they ever did. And then to explore what happened. Because what I've learned is that frequently people who say they don't believe in God, they grew up in some kind of a faith tradition, and that some very negative or painful experience has drove them away from it. The other aspect, I think, about this question of atheism is the Anna Maria Rizzuto, who is she's an Argentinian psychoanalyst and psychiatrist, wrote the book, The Birth of the Living God, in which she looked at how people represented God to themselves. And her conclusion was that even atheists have a representation of God that they reject. So we all have a representation of God. And if, depending on what it is, if you were raised by Jewish parents who survived the Holocaust, the God who allowed the Holocaust is the God you don't want to have in your life. So I think it's a question, this is where the question of exploration is so fascinating. It's when people say they don't believe in God, how would they describe the God they don't believe in?
Right.
Because there's something there that they're rejecting. And I think that the idea of spirituality is to help people pay attention to where energy is in their life, where love is, where peace is, where joy is. And that, however people want to name the higher power, the universe, love, the spirit, that's what expands people's consciousness, I think. Whereas religion can sometimes narrow what people feel are possibilities. And so I think that's why spirituality is expansive.
Let me answer
And it
that
also
real quick.
invites them in.
The Andy Newberg at two things. Andy Newberg at Duke has actually found that when you look at the health benefits of being religious, and also some of the neurological kind of different specific stuff related to religiosity, he's actually found that if you take atheists, people who really define themselves as atheists, that there's actually a spiritual atheist and a non-spiritual atheist. And the spiritual atheist is an individual who is connected to something larger than themselves. Maybe that's like Greenpeace or something bigger than themselves. And they experience the same health benefits and neurological things that have been seen in individuals who are spiritual as those who are people of faith. And so it's about being connected to that something larger than yourself. And then also I would say about what Nancy just said, the research that we're doing now with God image and looking at its the individual's God image and how that's related to mental health outcomes. The scale that we use that we've developed is it's not tied to any particular tradition, and it can be filled out by atheists. And so, because it says, so even if you don't believe in God, what would you believe God was like? And it has a whole set. And sure enough, if they hold these like a critical God view or a distant God view, they have the same negative outcomes as people of faith that hold those that have negative mental health outcomes. So whether you believe in God or not, you believe that God would be in a certain way. And that is a point of discussion that can have significant outcomes for your mental health.
Right. Right.
That is really interesting. And actually, both of you touched on what I wanted my final question to be. And that is, as you look forward, what kind of research in this area do you think we still need to do to bring greater understanding and enlightenment to the connection of spirituality or religion and mental health? And that will be our last question for today, because we're running a little bit over. So who would like to take that first? What research
like to go first?
Needs to be done? Matt, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay. I would say that, and what we're working on is, I think that religion, spirituality is just a horribly kind of under-assessed part of kind of multicultural factors in clients. And it's just ignored, at least that's not taught to be a pathology anymore, but it's completely ignored. And so we're really working on how can you develop an assessment of religion, spirituality that's actually tied to clinical outcomes that can be used across faith traditions, even by a person or a therapist or a provider who is not a person of faith, but they don't have to put in some kind of big interpretive kind of religious context, but that it's meaningful to them to use in the context of their therapeutic intervention, and it's beneficial to the client. So that's where I really see, and I think also from that comes the idea of how do we train clinicians to be competent in this area, because frankly, they just ignore it. I mean, it's just horrible.
That's what I wanted to say, Matt, is that I think
Yes.
the next area of research that we have to keep pursuing the resistance, first of all, on the part of the professional schools of psychology, social work, psychiatric nursing, psychiatry, the resistance to incorporating the understanding of religion and spirituality in clinical work.
Mm-hmm.
And the resistance on the part of the clinicians. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier of the unresolved faith element in clinicians' lives. And I always think that it's humorous that people who reject religion and the rituals and the structures, there's such a structure and ritual to therapy and to the process and to the credos, And so I think that secular mental health has replaced religion and from a more dogmatic or community point of view. So I would say mental health and medical people we need to keep investing in the research that shows why is this being ignored? How can it be incorporated into schools and into work? And the collaboration between clergy and mental health people.
That's so good. And I wish Lisa were here to close this up today, because that really was part of the reason that we decided to do this partnership initially. We met last summer at a conference where it was the clinical side of the picture. It was a very small conference we held of the American Psychiatric, American Psychological, American Counseling. And we were looking at that clinical side of the picture and what do we need to do to get them to more engage and understand the benefits that come from combining spirituality in mental health treatment protocols. So I will look forward to further research in this area, and we'll invite you back if you come to us and let us know you've done that. Thank you so much, both of you, for being with us today. It's really been a joy to hear of your research and of the progress that you're making in your own areas. We really appreciate your insight and your leadership and really showing the way to others of how to do this. We will be sending the recording for today's webinar out to everyone who registered for this discussion, and we'll include the PowerPoint that Lisa did at the beginning of the program, and also the websites of both Dr. Kehoe and Dr. Stanford to share that with you. We ask you also to join us in 2 weeks for the fourth in this series, fourth webinar in this series, entitled Spirituality and the Life Course of Mental Illness, Support for Patients, Caregivers, and Family by the Faith Community. And we are so excited that we will have Kay Warren from Saddleback Church, as well as Dr. Harold Koenig from Duke University to join us for that webinar. So that's going to be terrific as well. 2 weeks from today on November 10th.
How do we register for that, Shannon?
Excuse me?
How do we register for that?
The registration information for that will be in the email that we send out after the webinar today. So we will make sure that you and Matt both have that as well. And also, if anyone has any follow-up questions that were not addressed today, please feel free to email us at partnerships@hhs.gov. We thank you again for joining us today. We thank our guest speakers and wish you well as you go through the rest of your day. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.